Hello and welcome to She Leads Collective podcast. I'm Mary Gregory and I'm so glad you're here. This podcast is a space for honest conversations about what it really means to lead as a woman today and how we can all show up with more courage, care and clarity. You'll hear from inspiring women, powerful allies and bold truth tellers who are changing the game, not by playing tougher, but by leading smarter, softer and stronger. Hello and welcome to today's episode. So, what if the extraordinary talent we most need isn't sitting in plain sight, but hidden in the places we least expect? Well, my guest today is someone who has spent her career finding that extraordinary spark in overlooked places and people. Fiona Lindsay is the founder of Awaken Her, a globally acclaimed coach, creative producer and writer. With over 25 years of international practice, Fiona has worked with a diverse range of clients, including Netflix, Cancer Research UK, BlackRock, HarperCollins, and many more. Fiona blends psychology, performance, and storytelling to create transformative programs that help high-achieving individuals communicate with impact, unlock their potential and thrive. Her background is in theatre, radio and film, and she has shaped a unique approach which combines creativity with human insight. She's also a published author, writing the memoir for the actress Alison Steadman, Out of Character, which became an instant 5-star bestseller. And today, I'm hoping to explore with Fiona her journey as a creative maverick, her philosophy of radical non-judgment, which is a term I happen to really love, and how she helps others find the extraordinary in the ordinary. Fiona, a big warm welcome to you today. Thank you for giving up your time to join me.
It's a pleasure. I'm really happy to be here, Mary. Hello.
Hello. And to start with, I'd love to ask you, what do you mean by radical non-judgment and what does it mean to you?
Oh, it's really interesting because, I've only recently started thinking about this and realizing how important it's been in my life. And as you were talking there, I was thinking, when did that begin and why did that begin? And I think it's worth mentioning that so much of what any of us do began way back, that phrase, show me the child at 7 and I'll show you the man or woman, etc. And my childhood was very peripatetic. I was moved because of my dad's work in the Navy from pillar to post, and before 11 went to 10 or 11 schools, and I'd always pitch up in the middle of term, and I was that very freckly faced Scottish girl, and I'd be going to schools in Europe and in England, predominantly Southern Europe and England. And I'll never forget going to school in Cornwall, and the headmaster and my mum, I don't know why she'd done this, but she put me in a kilt with a berry, right? I go into this school in Cornwall and the headmaster, Mr. Jones, says, "This is Fiona, she's from Scotland." And immediately, even though I'd never lived in Scotland, immediately all of my classmates formed an opinion of me. And they immediately formed that opinion and judged me. I was the Scottish girl. I spoke a different way. I spoke like I speak now. But they started, calling me in a Scottish accent, etc. And then names and things. And I was judged. And I was always judged from the moment I walked in. And maybe that rubbed off in me in a different way. I was always really careful never to do the same. And I think that has trailed through my life, actually. I work a lot in the literature world, and there is that old stock phrase, never judge a book by its cover. And it's so true. Never judge a person. In theatre, which is my background, in the rehearsal room, we are invited to ask a multitude of questions and not necessarily have any answers. And when approaching character, we must never make a judgment. We must never think of, let's just say, the Scottish play The Macbeth, oh, they are evil people. We must ask why and what and how come and all those things. So I think possibly my early years and my training and my subsequent years in an industry that doesn't judge but is very judged, I think I just within my DNA, I don't make judgment. And I actually think that's a really useful tool.
Is absolutely, and something that many of us could benefit from. And certainly if you're in the coaching world, it's a really important tool, and as a leader it's a really important tool as well. But you've reminded me of how easy it is to judge and how quickly we do as human beings, and particularly as children. You know, they say out of the mouths of babes, there's no editing, is there? They're just straight out there letting it rip, really. But what a tough lesson for you, but how valuable as well.
I think it's interesting, isn't it? I think it both ways. It's about survival. You know, we are animal instinct. And I think that those young people that I encountered as I grew up through my younger education, that was survival for them. And for me, my survival was actually the opposite. It was actually, don't make any big decisions about anybody, because you don't know who is going, you're going to need to sort of be, you know, to help you through.
Okay, well, let's move a bit more into your journey as a maverick and an outsider. You describe yourself as a creative maverick. And again, how has that shaped your career and what you do in terms of your contribution to others?
That's really interesting. And another, I think, really useful combination of words, creative and maverick. They go together really nicely. It's a brilliant marriage. For me, maverick is the person who isn't conventional, who does things sort of maybe in a slightly topsy-turvy way or not expected for sure. And I didn't coin that phrase for me. I find it very hard to say anything about me, actually. But it was a former artistic director at the Royal Shakespeare Company who said, Fiona, you are a real creative maverick. He also used the term intrapreneur, because I was in the organization shaking it up like an entrepreneur. And he also said, maybe rather less flatteringly, you are a combination of a chameleon and an amphibious tank. So basically what he was saying was, I maybe consciously or unconsciously, most likely unconsciously, dared to go where other people did not go. You know, this was a hugely dyed-in-the-wool organization. It's an amazing organization, but it's like an oil tanker. It takes forever to turn around. And I was young, I was in my 20s when I began there, and perhaps I didn't have that patience, or just wasn't aware that it was so slow to turn. And I would just go, I'd quite like to do this. I'd quite like to do that. And I'd knock on the right door and I'd persuade and persuade and persuade and annoy people and got things done.
Can you give me an example of something that you did?
Yeah, I mean, it started actually in 1994. I had spent 4 years traveling the length and breadth of the UK in my beaten up old Volvo. And I was like, oh, I knew those motorways like the back of my hand. And I was running 3-hour workshops with many actors who are now very, very famous. And I got tired of that. And I thought, oh, I was trained as an actor. So I thought, I want to get back on stage, but not as an actor. I thought, I'd like to show how these shows are put together. And the company didn't do that at the time. And I knocked on the door of the then company manager, Sonia Desange, and she was very charming and very polite and went, but Fiona, we don't do that here. We do shows. That's what we do. We do shows. And I said, but I can show the audience how we do our shows. And she went, well, if you can persuade Jeff Locker, he was the production manager. So I went to Jeff and Jeff went, well, if you can persuade, and then I went to someone else. And eventually I had all these people that I persuaded, and they said, okay, you've got no budget for this, so you have to make money from it. We've given you very little support. So I went to the box office and I went to the marketing departments and I just persuaded them. But most importantly, I persuaded the actors. Actors are treasure, you know, across the board in so many different ways. And we were doing The Broken Heart, which was a Jacobean play, and that cast was second to none. And I thought, I was young, so I mean, if I was to do it now, I wouldn't do it with the whole cast, but I invited the whole cast. And quite a lot of them, I mean, more than half, pitched up. And I invited lighting and directors and everything. And brilliantly, there was a full house. So we packed the Swan Theatre at £5 a pop, you know, so 500 seats at £5 a pop. I can't do that maths. But, you know, and I went on stage at 10:30, or maybe 10 o'clock it was. I actually booked 2 hours, which is ridiculous because that's longer than the first half of the show. And I said, hello and welcome. I had no fear. And, you know, unscripted, unrehearsed. And we did this thing. And, you know, we looked at scenes and I unpicked scenes. We looked at how the light works, you know, all the different movements and the new technology. And we made it a show. It wasn't me on my own, but I did it with them.
And you ran it without any real structure. You just went in there and opened up the exploration of what went on to make the show happen.
the structure is always in my head, always. From my training at drama school as an actor, I was really fortunate in my second year, and this was open to everybody, but not everybody took it, only four of us. Do you want to earn some extra money in the holiday time? And I thought, yes, please. I don't want to work in Topshop again. So could you create a show, no budget, to take into, they were called areas of high priority in Edinburgh. And at that time, the AIDS epidemic was still very rife in Edinburgh. And I thought,
Yes.
absolutely, I want to do that. And when you have to structure something from nothing, it feels like the sort of seat of your pants, but it's not really at all. It's like this conversation, you managing this conversation, you know where it's going, and I'm trusting that you do that. And so it's exactly the same like that event on stage or creating a show, those shows out of nothing way back when I was still at drama school. You've got enough experience to know, about beginning and middle and end. And actually, drama school training teaches you so much about all of that.
I mean, the courage to do that is phenomenal. But also, what I
Mm.
hear, a key strength of yours is persuasiveness. The fact you were able to engage everyone,
Mm.
including the whole cast, to come and play with you and all the different elements of the theatre. The maths is £2,500 you earned the theatre from doing that event with that one-off event. Are you able to unpack and share with us what you think the key is to being persuasive?
Wow, good question. Interesting, isn't it? I think maybe some of us are born with that within them. I don't know. But I actually think underneath it, when you think about it in the most honorable sense, it's enthusiasm. And enthusiasm is communication is a transfer of enthusiasm. I was lucky to have an incredibly enthusiastic dad. And I've always had that within me. I've always thought that everything is possible
Mm.
and not impossible. That's where I've always begun. So with that energy, you knock on a dressing room door, or you walk into the green room, or you knock on a manager's door, and you share that enthusiasm and that the potential and where it's going to go. So again, I think that came from way back. But I have to say, and I was out with the current director of the Royal Shakespeare Company the other night, and he began in 1994, and he remembers me doing all of that work and beginning that work. Um, when you have to steel yourself, despite how I might sound, I'm not a naturally gregarious person. I am passionate about what I love, and that passion drives me forward. So I would be knocking on doors of all sorts and hanging around in the green room and going to do the ask, and my heart would be beating. And if someone said no, you go, this is hard. And in later years, I'd program for big literature festivals and have to do exactly the same. And you have to steel yourself. I'm not, naturally born, sort of confident, I suppose, in that respect. Person, I can do many things that people think, wow, she's confident, but it's a lot of effort.
That's interesting as well, because I do a lot of work with confidence, and I agree with you that I think confidence, it's like this thing that we try and describe and hang on to, but it ebbs and flows.
Mm.
And there's something about when we're aligned with ourselves and when we really believe in what we're doing, it kind of just comes out naturally. Like I'm hearing, that situation that you described at the RSC, you really believed in that as a concept to actually let's unpack the play and how we put the shows on for the audience so they get an insight. You really believed in that, and that gave you that confidence, is what I'm hearing.
And I think that's really interesting what you've just said. I think, what is it? And that persuasion, belief.
Yes.
Belief is fundamental. And I've said it, I also, like you, do a lot of coaching, and I've always hated the phrase fake it till you make it, because I don't believe that gives you any substantial confidence. I think when you're pretending something, that's different from acting, we can come to that. But when you're pretending and it's a superficial costume you're wearing, you're never feeling grounded. So I would always say, actually, find that tiny kernel, that seed that you go, actually, that is me, that works for me, that's a core value of mine. Oh, and then water it, grow it, and see what happens.
Very good. So again, alignment with your values, which we had a guest on earlier in the season, a young leader actually. She's succeeded really well and really early in her career. She's not even 30 yet. And her whole take was start with your
Wow.
values. That's where you start. Because if you're aligned with your values, life is just so much easier.
100%. And, so often people will go off track, can be taken off track. And that's when we falter. That's when we stumble and go, who am I? anymore. But when you stay true or return to true, then I think amazing things can happen.
Let's move on a bit more with you and your journey. You've said that you've never felt fully part of any one group. How has that experience of being an outsider helped you notice, listen, and support others?
Yeah, so I've touched on my school years, and then at my drama school, I was the youngest by many, many years. I went from school at 17 to drama school. I've also, and I know it's silly to mention, maybe superficial, but people can't see me here, but I have more freckles than I've ever seen anybody in my whole life, and I'm 60. So it's there's lots of things that put me, or I've placed myself on the edge of things for safety's sake. But when you're on the edge of anything, even at the RSC, when I was between the creative teams and the administrative teams, when you're in between or on the edge, you are gifted, strangely, time. And you're also gifted, strangely, if you choose it, a certain invisibility. And what that allows is you to really develop you and to take time to listen and learn to listen and take time to look and learn to look. And really importantly, in my world of work, take time to get under the surface, get under the skin, step into the shoes of another person. So actually, it's strangely, it's all worked out.
That is incredible. And you use it in your work brilliantly. I mean, I want to bring it back to the radical non-judgment piece as well. I mean, they all seem to come together and it really fuels what you do in your work and supports your work. I also like to ask then, what role do you feel deep listening and absorbing someone else's energy plays in helping people feel seen? So thinking about your clients and some of the people you've worked with, how do you help them feel seen?
It's a really nice question as well. And strange, as you were talking there, the word delicate came into my mind. I think there's a delicacy to communication that perhaps we don't always register, especially in a time of, that massive loudness that's out there in social media. I think, our ears, are the most delicate part of our bodies, right? They are really fragile and are, in a way, they're sort of representative of our senses, which are fragile. Not that doesn't mean we're broken. It just means they're delicate. It's delicate. And I think that so in all my work, whether that be working with an actor to help them tell their story that I then turn into a memoir, or working with a client, who's a big hitting CEO person, but actually is feeling rather, anxious and fragile, or running workshops with young people as I used to do. I think the most important thing is if you allow people to feel that they have the time to express themselves in the way that they need to or only can, then I think that helps somebody be seen and heard. So, for example, way back in the day at the Royal Shakespeare Company, I was traveling, in fact, luckily to travel all over the world, working with kids in very, very disadvantaged circumstances. And some of those young children, young people, found it really hard to even say their name. So you wouldn't wait for them to say their name. You'd make it very easy for them to say something else. And then eventually their name would come. In the coaching world, I will always begin really simply with somebody because I think it's like, and again in this conversation, I don't know what's coming next. Any of my clients don't know initially what's coming next. And so, of course, there's a nervousness. So you want to be able to give space for that without focusing on it.
Yes. So it's moving from that place of being the expert and the knowing to being the person who's curious. This is where the radical non-judgment comes in as well.
Absolutely. But I also think it's interesting that now it's much more proliferated as an industry. I don't know if that's the right word, it feels too heavy, by women. And that is brilliant.
So you feel the feminine element of coaching has come to the fore, and that's made a real difference.
Absolutely. I was talking using sort of soft power and it's talking about the power of that many, many, many years ago. And everybody would be laughing, actually, the men I was working with, oh, you're the fluffy person, Fiona. And actually, that is total rubbish. If you can enable a group or a human being to feel safe enough to begin to say, this is what's troubling me, or this is what I'd like to explore. And you do that using it just step by step, sort of, or threading one bead at a time in terms of their confidence, then in a gentle fashion. And I think that is very productive and a way forward.
Lovely. So we're going to move on and just start looking at some examples of your work and the impact you've had in the approach that you take. You talk about finding the extraordinary in the ordinary. You've mentioned to me about a project that you worked when you were helping young women who were from quite complex backgrounds, and you helped them step into the workplace. If they hadn't worked with you, they wouldn't necessarily have ended up stepping into the workplace. So just share something about that project. I think that story is fascinating.
Yeah, that's so for many years now, for nearly 8 years, I've worked with a large media organization, streaming global media organization. And about 3 years ago, they created a philanthropic opportunity to work with young women who had just come out of prison, but within the prison education system had sort of picked up on the creative arts, but especially in film and television. And so 3 women were selected, and then once the women had been selected, the company came to me and said, could you put together a project really to demonstrate how this might work, because we can't just, have some coaching session. It needs to lead to something. So I put a proposal together, which they loved. And about 6 months after putting that together, I began with 3 women. And I have to say, it was one of those, it felt a lot like coming home, because in my drama school career, that's sort of where in that second year of work where I went into these areas of high priority, it felt like coming home. It felt like the opportunity to give back as well. So I was with each of them twice a week on Zoom and sometimes in person. We would gather as well. And initially, for the first 6 months of a 3-year project, the job was to actually just get them to turn up. Get them to turn up and be and feel safe with me, whose experience is completely different. But very strangely, there was an absolute deep connection fused between all 3. I did with them individually and drew them together as groups. And what was so, again, ordinary and the extraordinary, I haven't had a privileged background. My mum and dad worked really hard to keep us all 3, going. But I was warm and safe. None of these 3 women were warm and safe. And they knew this was a really good opportunity because this company was also paying them as well to participate in this project. So the first 6 months were about establish assimilation and new environment and trust, and beginning back to that person couldn't say their name, beginning to go, actually, you might be able to have a strong voice at the table. What is that voice? Discovering voice, recalling experience and putting it to good purpose. And then the next stage was, in the next 6 months, was identifying production companies in London who we could place them with. And by the end of that 6 months, they were placed and paid. And then the next bit of time was to actually make sure that they turned up, make sure that they didn't sink back into feeling inadequate, feeling that they had nothing to offer, or even worse, bad ways. And I have to say, they were just shining lights. And what they taught me about resilience and tenacity and, all those things, courage, that are really important, that sometimes we can just let go, was phenomenal. And they are all thriving. And the project, I'm sad this project ended a year ago. And I miss them dreadfully.
But they're still thriving.
They're thriving, yes.
So what a fantastic story of absolutely supporting them and helping them transform their lives.
Yeah, that's, I think we all have a duty of care towards one another. And it can be in that sort of big sense, like that project was, or it can be in a much more reduced sense. It could even just be to do with how we look after our elderly parents or parent, or how we communicate with our next door neighbours. But I do think, back to radical non-judgment as well, that duty of care, to actually think, actually, how can I look out for these people or this person? Because one day I might need that too.
Just a lovely and amazing story. Thank you for sharing that. Beautiful. What actually did you learn
Mm.
about resilience and creativity? You said you learned a lot from them. So, what were some of the things that you actually took away?
Oh gosh, I haven't really thought about it in that way, but I think actually resilience is it moves, it shifts. We don't have it all the time, and nor do we have to have it all the time. But I think when we need it, we must listen to our instinct. And often life prevents you from listening to your instinct because there's so many other things distracting you. And listening to our basic instinct, what is right, what is wrong, what is true to me, that is really important. And actually, when life hits, that's when you have to really listen to yourself. And that listening to yourself, I believe, helps you get through and helps you your ability to be resilient.
Fantastic. And is that a project you're going to be repeating, or was that a
It
one-off?
was a one-off, but they, as a result of their work, so when people are coming into the production houses now who are young with little experience, these women are doing some support work that the other way around.
Oh, fantastic. So they're like being mentors for other
Yes.
women as well
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Incredible, wonderful story. Why do you think so much talent then gets overlooked? I mean, that's a very big general question, I realise, but there is a sense that is a lot of talent out there. I mean, I had Lucy Ryan on very at the beginning of my this season actually talking about how midlife women are a huge talent resource that just go unnoticed. But I don't think they're the only ones that go
Mm.
unnoticed. There's just an element of a lot of talent seems to get overlooked. Why do you think that is? And what can we do about it?
It's difficult, isn't it? I think today, I think there are gatekeepers. There are lots of gatekeepers that prevent it, it make it difficult for people to get to the person who would help them along the way. And I think being helped along the way is really important. But so there are gatekeepers. Also, with social media, suddenly those people who were once just one thing are now an expert in everything. And because they were once one thing and a famous one thing or an established one thing, and now there are other things too. It makes it very difficult for people to get into, communities that they feel should naturally thrive in. I also think people are lazy. I think we're lazy. I
Yes.
think back to judgment. I think we go, okay, we'll just have that. I think big organizations have a way of filtering. I mean, maybe they have a way of filtering application forms. Often jobs are filled internally, but the advert has to go out. So, there's so many blocks to actually
And
making,
there's also AI comes into that as well, that even applying for a job these days,
yeah,
you've got to make sure your application's got the words that the algorithm's looking for.
all of that. So it's a bit like a game of snakes and ladders or dodgems. You've got to get to the other side. And I think to get to the other side, back to where we sort of began in a way, being a little bit more hustly and a little bit more creative mavericky is a good thing.
There's something about how things have been overstructured as well, that that going back to the whole AI bit with the algorithm in recruitment processes and things, how difficult that can make it to apply for a job and for there to be that unusual candidate to come through because they're not necessarily going to match what the algorithms are looking for.
No, I think it's hard. I do think it's hard. I have a 29-year-old son who's a bit like me in his maverickness, but has gone through a phase where he felt he needed to look into the sort of a more traditional pathway. And you know, he's very skilled,
Yes.
got nowhere. And so he's just gone, that's not for me. And that's correct. And I also think this is something that, again, drama school training gave me, so I feel very comfortable about it. I make a lot of my own work and a lot of my opportunities happen. I don't, a bit like the RSC, no one said to me, Fiona, will you do this? I went, I want to do this, right? And I think the more of us that go, I'd like to try this, I want to do this, then I think that makes you, you visible to yourself first
Yes.
and foremost. And I think that's important.
So putting yourself, you're in your own driving seat is what I'm hearing. You make it happen. And actually, I'm a great believer that actually wherever you work, whatever your life is, you're still in that position where you can make it happen. But often the way we've been brought up or socialized, we might be educated that, we're going to be going into this big organization. You'll get looked after in there. This is what will happen. But actually, it's up to you to create what you want to happen, not necessarily always going along with this is how things are.
I think that's really the only way to think. And I luckily had a grandmother who stopped work at 82, who moved, left school at 14 with nothing. And then, she ducked and dived and did all sorts of things to, help herself initially, and then my mother and her family, and kept going till she was 82 or 85, in fact, as a legal secretary, having retrained at 60. When you have that as example and a father who's similarly inclined, you don't see the blocks. And of course, the blocks are there. And my head is probably covered in foreheads, knocking my head against the walls of opportunity all the time. But I think it's true. And I had a great phrase the other day, which I'll share because I thought it was so great. It was talking about, mid-aged women, and I never use that phrase either. I just think I probably do look my age and all of that sort of stuff, but I just don't think it or feel it. I think, okay, still keep going. I'm still as energetic as I was. But the phrase was greater later. I thought it was
Oh,
great.
yes, I like that. Greater
Greater
later.
later. Yeah, I'm going to be
Yeah,
greater later.
fabulous. I actually got another question just off the cuff. Do you believe that we create our own luck?
I think if you keep, people talk about vibrations and energy and all of that. I think if we sort of keep stirring our pot, proverbial pot, then that someone will sort of know what, will feel it or smell it and want a bit of it. So therefore, someone we might get an opportunity that comes our way. Yes, I think is the answer to that. Because if you do nothing, coin a Shakespeare phrase, nothing comes from nothing, you know. So I've always believed, just one small step, whatever that step of make it active, not a thought. It has to be an active thing.
Absolutely. And actually, that comes back to that right to the beginning when we talk about confidence. If you want to be more confident, do something, take some action, even if it's the tiniest,
Yeah.
tiniest little action, because actually, in taking that action, that starts to build that sense of confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this podcast, for example, no one's made you do it. You've decided to do it, and you're here. You are, absolutely doing it. And you will feel different today than you felt when you decided to do it, and from the moment you began to do it. So it's that process, isn't it? And I think that's a great education as well. I think, I look back to my own education, but I've done a lot of work in schools with the Royal Shakespeare Company. And sometimes I think, actually, just in terms of confidence, enabling young people through participation in theatre and drama, which is just, and keep doing it and doing it and doing it. If that began, let's say tomorrow, in all the schools from infant school and continued for 18 years, in 18 years, we'd see a group of young people come out with this wonderful inbuilt, natural, inherent, gorgeously rich confidence, think called confidence, and be able to do these presentations and keynote speeches with real authenticity as opposed to anything else.
Fabulous. Well, let's move on and think a bit more about leaders and organizations because you work very much in that space as well. What do you think leaders can learn from your work, particularly about creating safe spaces where people can thrive?
First of all, they have to do the work on themselves. We can never expect anybody to be how we wish them to be if we don't understand ourselves. So I think those CEOs that I work with, both men and women, who are willing to look at themselves in the mirror, hold the mirror up to nature, as it were. I think that's the first step. And I think that when they do that, then immediately they become much more understanding of anybody sitting in front of them, cognizant of their team and their team's requirements. It's interesting back to theatre, how theatre teaches so much. So in theatre, you or I could be cast in a play, right? And so we're within a cast of characters, and within that cast of characters, there's antagonist, the protagonist, there's the foil, the mentor, the confidant, etc. That's the A strand, and there's a similar in the B strand, right? So as a person in that play, or even directing that play, I have to know who I am in this story, and I have to know who I am in this story according to who else is in this story, and also according to what other people say about me as well as I say about myself. That is fundamental. That's where you begin in any rehearsal process. So I think about leaders and leadership, if and then they and their team are the cast of characters. Now we're always the protagonist in our story, right? We are the leading person in our story, but we have to know who our antagonist is. We have to know who our foil is. We have to know who the mentor is. And I think all of this, if you do your work on yourself first, and then you look outward and think, who am I within all of these people? I think the more you do that, the more sort of a cohesiveness builds and a harmony. And that harmony leads to trust and safety.
That's a really lovely analogy, the way you've described it there as well. But also, what I'm really getting is such a consistent thread through this podcast. In just about every leader I've spoken to, the work starts with yourself. You can't just make other people do it if you're not looking at it from your own point of view, and doing the inner work on yourself first.
Yes, which
really, really important.
Which we have to do too. I find that that's incredibly important. I was watching this, really lowering the tone, maybe, or maybe not. I was watching Netflix and Meghan Markle's second series of her show, With Love, Meghan.
Oh, right.
And she had the development coach. I don't know what he's called. I do know what he's called, but I don't know what his title is. Jay Shetty, right? So he's a phenomenal star on Instagram and all that, and he has all these big, huge events and everything. And he comes across, when you see him on those platforms, as like charismatic and just oozing this sort of je ne sais quoi and everything. Anyway, he was there with his wife and they were cooking and making various things, and he was at sea, and he went, oh, I need some help. I don't know how to do this. And, and Meghan went, hey, dude, you're not meant to be like this. You're the guy who knows how to be. And he went, this was spot on. He went, I don't know it all the time. And actually being like this is really important for me, to not know and to feel anxious, because then I understand those people who come to me. And I thought it was a very honest thing for him to say.
But also there's that whole thing about, as human beings, we almost aspire to being perfect. And that completely rules out the ability to have those vulnerable moments, and those moments where actually, goodness me, I don't know what I'm going to do here, or I don't know what the decision is. That is a perfectly human reaction, but it's being able to recognize them, work through it, and the feelings that might emerge for you as a result of that is so important.
It doesn't have to be perfect. You might not be able to finish. All of that is very, to accept that and allow it, from both a person in the situation or as a leader, is really important, I think.
I mean, I think that's so true. And leadership and life can be messy, and we've got to accept that will happen. But there's something I learned actually from a leader at Tesco's, actually, is always leave people in a better place than you found them. Even if you can't solve or get everything resolved at once, it's like, as long as we've moved it and we've edged further forward, that's what's important. Are we doing better today than we were doing yesterday? That's a great question to ask yourself, I think.
I think that's a really great way to look at things, as long as that person saying, always leave people better, better off. What was the phrase again?
Leave people in a better place than when you found them.
Than when you found them. Yeah. So the person saying that, any of us saying that, we have to walk into that place with eyes open, ears open, heart open, head open, because what fits for one person might not fit for another. So you've got to be really careful and sensitive about all of that.
Great. I love that. That's a real build on what we were just saying. So I also wanted then to explore, how do you think, so, on this subject of being mindful of people and having your eyes, ears, heart open to the differences that people are in how they're being, and their different strengths and skills. What can organisations do to notice more what untapped potential there is within their people?
So I think, I work with this big media company, and they have made a wonderful investment across the board. It's not just me, obviously, and probably many people like me, but they've made a wonderful investment in training. So it's not just for, a special sort of team day out or an off-site, emergency meeting, or it's because someone's got a big speech to do. It's almost daily or, weekly or daily, and I think that is really important to actually. So if you have that sort of that philosophy, I suppose, of coaching and training embedded at the heart of an organization, and it's without judgment, again, without judgment, radical judgment. It's just like we want to enable our human beings in this organization to feel that they can expand and grow and stretch or test or just or just feel they've got someone to see and hear them. I think that's where I would start. I'd also say as well that, and I've been talking about this recently with another organization, that actually so many large organizations operate in silos. This department doesn't know what that department does, and actually everybody needs to know, because if you don't share that knowledge or understanding, there's just always going to be clash. So I think I've got some work coming up with this, with some TV production companies and their internal stakeholders. If one team of internals don't understand what the externals do, there's always going to be a tension. So I think that sort of work as well, and it's more than, hello, I am Fiona and I do this. It's actually properly running, doing sessions for people.
And maybe going shadow your colleagues and things in different parts of the organization. So I got a real sense of integrating learning and development into the
Yeah.
day to day. So it's normalized. This is just what we do around here.
It is I think it's normalized. I created something called Work Well, initially for Netflix, and then for a couple of companies in America, and then for a company in the Middle East. And so basically, Work Well, it's exactly what it says on the tin. Organizations need and want, I hope, their employees, their team members to work well, to work to their, potential, but also to be well at work. So I said, look, this Work Well. It's like a drop-in service. You don't have to go and sign up for, via HR. You don't have to tell your boss. You just know that me or someone like me is available on these days at, this many sessions per day. Anyway, that has proved very successful. It was signed up within, the day of putting on a notice board, certainly at Netflix. And people, I do it as individuals turn up, and they might have said, I want to become better at speaking out at meetings, or I want to help with this keynote speech, or I'm not having impact. They might say a lot of things, but always, I think the golden thread throughout every single person is, in a busy life, in working within a busy organization, no matter who you are, we all need time just to go, breathe out, and in the exhale, discover, both where the pain points are and where our strength is.
Lovely. Okay. I also get then, in summarizing everything that you've just said there, integrating development, and making development not just about building skills, but also looking after yourself and giving yourself space to breathe, and also the cross-fertilization piece as well. Really important. You've described some lovely, lovely approaches there, Fiona. Thank you. So we're going to sort of move into closing our conversation now. And I'd just like you to think about your career as a whole. So you've had such a rich career. And as you look back, you've been creating safe spaces for people. You've taught people about how to be visible and to belong. What do you think keeps you going as a creative maverick?
I get excited by story. I get excited. I can see story in anything. You could hand me something and I can make a story up with it, or I could stand next to somebody in a bus stop and I can make up a story. I get excited by story. I get excited by environment. I was at a theatre a couple of nights ago in London, watching Born with Teeth, and I just went on my own, and I sat there and I felt like I was at home again. I get excited by, the union between something on a stage and a group of strangers, I get excited by that. Um, that keeps me going. I get excited when someone says, "Can you help me with?" And I think, "Oh, I don't know. Yes, I can. I will." I get excited by that too. Someone a few years ago said, I'm a composer. I've got to write something for the BBC and I'm stuck. And somebody recommended you. Could you? I thought, "Oh, really? I'm not sure." Anyway, cut a long story short, I wrote a piece called Scene, and it was performed at the Barbican and then the Albert Hall. That was like incredible. And all because I thought, there's a story here. I can tell a story, and I can. I think that's what drives me forward. And also, I have to pay bills.
We have to pay bills. That's absolutely. But what I get is you are someone who really entertains possibility. That's come through the whole of our conversation, that there's no hesitation. You might have an immediate, "Oh, can I do that? Oh, yes, of course I can." You immediately go into the possibility rather than letting the fear take over, which is very powerful.
Yeah, I'm also really aware of what I can't do
Right.
as well. I think that's quite important. I was out a walk this morning and been having this conversation with the Royal Shakespeare Company about various things. And I think, God, if they asked me to be that, I'd have to say no because I'm really rubbish with money. So, I was a producer. I grew up through that company and ended up as a producer. I was a creative producer for them. The aspect of that role that I absolutely terrified me was I can run a budget, obviously, but I don't want that now. It's not what I'm good at. And I think it's really important to know what you can't do well as well.
Yes, playing to your strengths and what gives you
Yeah,
energy is what I'm
yeah,
hearing.
yeah.
Okay. And if you could leave our listeners with one call to action for embracing radical non-judgment, which has been a theme throughout this conversation. So embracing that radical non-judgment in their own leadership, what would it be?
Oh, gosh. I think this is a roundabout way of saying it, maybe. We haven't touched, but presence of mind, presence of body, actually that doing the being bit of being a human being. I think and that sounds very easy, but what that requires is for all of us to peel off the mask, to step into the vulnerable place and stand there for long enough to feel at ease. And if you can do that with yourself, then your understanding of other people is so much greater.
Lovely. Yes, I agree. When we understand ourselves better, the things we like, maybe not like so much, we're in a much
Yeah.
better place to be compassionate and understanding towards others, aren't we? Fiona, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolutely fascinating conversation.
You're welcome. I've loved it. It's really nice to be. I do a lot of interviewing, so it's really nice to be on the receiving end of someone's curiosity.
Real joy. Thank you. How can people find you?
I have a website. It's www.fionalindsay.com, and then my female focused coaching is www.awaken-her.com.
Okay, so both your websites. You're not
Yes.
on any social media?
Badly, yeah. Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn and on Instagram under my name.
Okay, okay. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the She Leads Collective podcast. If this episode resonated with you, follow the show or share it with a friend and leave a quick review below. Or leave us a comment. Change happens through conversation, so let's keep this one going. Listen out for the next episode and join me as we keep lifting the lid on the stories that matter. Take care and keep leading with heart.